Okay, welcome to Mobile Math. So in this lesson, we're going to do factoring polynomials with a leading coefficient greater than 1. In the previous lesson, I did the leading coefficient was equal to 1. Now we're going to work on when the coefficient is greater than 1, which we're going to need that technique, factoring by grouping. So looking at this problem right here, the first thing you really want to do is check to see if you have a common factor. Because if you have a common factor, you always want to take that out first before you start factoring. Technically, with these problems, if you did not, you could factor all the way through, but then in the end, you're going to have to take out the common factor. And if you do that, a lot of times it'll make the numbers larger, and then it makes the factoring more difficult when you get to the end. Where if you take out the common factor in the beginning, it makes the problem a little bit easier. So when we look at problem number 1, we got a 2, a 7, and a 3. We don't have a common factor, so we can't do that, but you want to check it first. So going to the technique that we use for factoring, we're going to multiply these terms right here. So the leading coefficient, which is a 2, and this last term, which is a 3. When you multiply, that gives us a positive 6. So we'll put that up here with our x. And then what we're trying to get down here is a positive 7. So in other words, whatever we multiply, two factors that we multiply, we want to get a positive 6. And when we add them, we want to get a 7. So again, multiply to get a 6. Add to get a 7. Well, we don't have many options for 6 in terms of factors. You have 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. But of course, if you were to add these together, those are the only two that are going to give you a 7. So we'll put this here. So we got 1 and 6. So you multiply these two, gives you 6. You add them, and it gives you a 7. So now we're going to drop two parentheses down, separated by a plus. And we're going to bring this term, this first term here, so 2x squared, and then this last term here, and put that in there. So that leaves these two spaces here. And what we're going to do is take these factors, put those in here, and we need to have whatever this middle variable is to put in with these factors. Now, one of the mistakes that students make, they'll just take these two common factors and go ahead and put those in parentheses in like x plus 1 times x plus 6. If you remember from the previous lesson, when the leading coefficient was equal to 1, you could do that, but not when the leading coefficient is greater than 1. We have to go through the complete technique of grouping. So I'm going to go ahead and put the 1x in here, so plus, I'm just going to put x instead of saying the 1, and this is going to be 6x right here. So what we need to do is take out a common factor from both of these here so that you get the same thing in the parentheses. So I can take out an x here, which would leave me with 2x plus 1. Remember, if you take the whole thing out, you got to put the 1 here, because this has to be equivalent to this. X times 2x is 2x squared. X times 1 is x. If you didn't have that there, it would just be 2x squared, so it's not the same thing. Here, we could take out a 3, and that leaves us with 2x plus 1, which is good, because we want those two to be the same. And then we're going to group now. So take the x and the positive 3. We're going to group those together. 1 parenthesis times 2x plus 1. And of course, if you were to multiply this, it would equal this up here, which is a good way to check, because you can definitely check to make sure you're correct. Multiply this, you should get what you have up here. And I'll point this out like I did in the other video. Sometimes students say, well, how come you only have 2x plus 1 here when you have two of them right here? Remember, if I were to multiply this out, I'm doing distributive property. So it would be x times 2x plus 1, which is what I have here. And then it would be 3 times 2x plus 1, which is what I have right here. Right? So let's look at second one. We got 6x squared minus 42x minus 48. Numbers are getting a little large. But remember, you want to check for a common factor first, because it might make it a lot easier if you do have a common factor. So you got a 6, 42, and 48. And you might recognize that, oh, all those are divisible by 6. Now remember, you want the largest common factor too. Obviously, they're divisible by 2, and it's divisible by 3 as well, but you want the largest common factor. So I'm going to go ahead and take out a 6. That leaves me with x squared minus 7x, and then minus 8. Again, this should be equivalent to this, 6 times x squared, 6 times negative 7x, and 6 times minus 8. So we're good. Now this is where students make the mistake. This kind of gets left off to the side and students forget about it. So what I always do, what I always tell my students to do is circle this number that you took out and then drop an arrow down so that you don't forget about it. So when you go through the rest of the factoring, you'll get to here and be like, why do I have this arrow? Oh, that's right, I gotta put my 6 back on there. It's part of the factoring, the simplified part of the factoring. So you have to make sure you put that on the end. A lot of students it gets lost out there and they forget it. Or they include it in with the factoring somehow and wind up making a mistake. So just circle it, drop an arrow down, you know I gotta put that on in the end. So now we're gonna go ahead and go through the technique here. We're gonna multiply. So 1, x squared, so 1 times negative 8 is negative 8. And then we're trying to get a minus 7 in the middle. So two factors that multiply to negative 8, but then they add to negative 7. So for 8, you have 1 and 8, 2 and 4. Well, there's no way we're going to get a negative 7 from these two numbers, so it's got to come from here. Now, if you want to get a negative 8 when you multiply, one of the terms has to be positive and one has to be negative. And then since we need to get a negative 7 when we add them, we need to make the 8 negative. So 1 times negative 8 is negative 8, and if you add 1 and negative 8, it gives you negative 7. So I'm going to put these in here in any order. It doesn't make a difference. So I'm going to drop down my two parentheses separated by a plus. And this is what I was talking about, where sometimes if students leave that 6 there, they might go ahead and put it down here right now. And then put these in here with these first terms, and it's going to be confusing and they'll make a mistake. So I'm going to drop this first term here, which is x squared, put down my negative 8. And now I want to put these two terms in here, and I need to have whatever this variable is in the middle. The order doesn't make a difference. So I'll even switch it up. I'll put the negative 8 in here, so negative 8x, and then I'll put an x right here. It actually makes it easier, because if I would have put the negative 8 in here, I would have had to take out a negative factor. I mean, you still could have done the problem, but it makes it easier doing it this way. So now take out a common factor out of both of these so that you get the same thing within the parentheses. So I could take out an x here, and that's going to leave me with x minus 8. And I already have an x minus 8. There's nothing I need to take out. It's already there. What I always tell the students to do is put the 1 here. Because if you're going to group, if you don't put a number here, students go like this, and there's nothing there, they'll just say it's x times x minus 8 and forget about it. And of course, that's not true. So if you don't have to take anything out, just put the 1 so you know when you're grouping it here, it's going to be x plus 1 times x minus 8. Notice I ended up right where the end of my arrow is, because I know I got to put this 6 down in front so that I have the complete factorization. Okay? So let's look at number 3, 8x squared plus 22x minus 6. So the first thing is we want to look for a common factor. So you got all these numbers are even, so we definitely have a 2. Is there any number we can use? You could try 4. No, that's not going to work. So 2 is going to be it. So I'm going to take out a 2, and that's going to leave me with 4x squared plus 11x minus 3. Again, 2 times 4x squared is 8x squared. 2 times 11x is 22x. And 2 times negative 3 is minus 6. What did I say to do with that 2? Circle that common factor, drop your arrow down so that you don't forget about it. And also that you don't include it in this middle part when you're factoring that. Extremely important step. So going through with our factoring, multiply 4 times negative 3. So that's going to be negative 12. And then we're trying to get a plus 11. So we need two factors that are multiplied to negative 12, but will add to positive 11. So you might recognize pretty quickly that it has to be 1 and 12. And one of those numbers has to be negative, because in order to get a negative here, you have to multiply negative times a positive. And we need a positive 11 when we add those, which means that this number here is going to need to be negative to 1. So negative 1 times 12 is negative 12. Negative 1 plus 12 is 11. So we're good. Now we're going to drop our two parentheses separated by a plus. Remember that this first term goes here, and this term, last term, goes here. Notice we have the arrow there, so I'm not going to mess around with that 2. That's going to come on in the end. And I didn't put these here. Sorry about that. And again, the order doesn't matter, the -1 to 12. So these 2 have to go in here in any order, and you need to have that variable x with it. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the -1x. I'm not going to put the 1. You could. It doesn't matter. And then 12x here. So at this point, we want to see what can we take out of both of these so we wind up with the same parentheses in each one. So I could take out an x here, which would leave me with 4x minus 1. Remember, if you take out the whole thing, it's 1, because when you divide, x by x is going to be 1. And if you weren't sure, just check. 4 times 4x is 4x squared. X times -1 is -x. Here, we can take out a 3. So take out a 3. That leaves me with 4x minus 1. Same thing there, taking out the whole factor, so the -1's left. Now we're ready to group together. So I'm going to put this together. So that leaves me with x plus 3 times 4x minus 1. And I'm not going to forget my common factor, which I took out in the beginning, which is 2. And we're good. So hopefully you enjoyed this lesson. There will be more lessons on factoring to come. And you can see those on Bombalo Math on my YouTube channel. And like my first period students used to say, make smart choices. See you next time.